Whenever I end up on hold with the phone company, I never hear the usual hold music. Instead, I end up listening to real people, desperate for help. I had just lost my phone and wasted no time calling the company. It's a contract phone, so I was hoping they'd replace it since coverage for lost phones is part of my plan. I managed to get a real person on the line without waiting too long, and I explained my situation. The guy on the other end of the line immediately started blaming me for losing my phone, saying I didn't qualify for a free replacement. I tried arguing back. After all, it's clearly in the policy. But then he told me he was going to put me on hold. As I sat there, waiting for him to come back after speaking with his manager, I expected to hear the usual cheesy hold music. But instead I was greeted by a voice that sounded desperate, like someone fighting for their life. A woman's voice came through, telling me she had been kidnapped and was locked away in some remote cabin deep in the woods. She was begging for my help, but I was so confused. I told her I was just trying to sort out a new phone. She started crying, pleading with me to do something, anything to help her. As I tried to gather the woman's contact information, I realized I wasn't on hold anymore. The customer service guy from the phone company was back on the line. He reminded me again that I didn't qualify for a free replacement. I was furious and snapped at him, telling him I was qualified since I had been paying extra each month for that very kind of insurance. He started flipping through my phone contract, and then, without warning, he put me on hold again. Expecting the usual cheesy hold music, I instead heard the voice of another person in need, sounding desperate. "Please help me. A group of people broke into my house and murdered everyone, except me." I was in shock, and all I could do was tell him to call the police, and that I had no idea why he was speaking to me. But he kept pleading, begging me to help him. I repeated that I was just here to get a new phone, but he wouldn't stop crying. Finally, I gave in, and just as I was trying to get more information, I realized I wasn't on hold anymore. The phone rep finally acknowledged that my contract did, in fact, entitle me to a replacement phone, no matter whose fault it was. I was relieved and quickly told him the make and model of my phone. But of course, he put me on hold again to check if that phone was even available. I was already on edge, and now the fear started creeping in. Who was going to ask for my help this time? Then, out of nowhere, a voice came through, sounding even more frantic than the last. "Please, help me. I'm buried alive in a coffin, and my phone is dying." I froze, heart pounding. The voice on the line, it was my voice. I couldn't believe it. I tried to get more details, my mind racing, but just as I was starting to process it all, the phone rep came back. He told me they were sending me an upgraded replacement phone. I work as a crime scene cleaner. I've been called to handle everything from murder scenes to suicides. But there's one thing that makes me stand out from the rest of the guys in my line of work. I clean those scenes completely naked. When I do it this way, I don't get a single drop of blood or dirt on me, and that's the reason I prefer to go without clothes. I'm so skilled at what I do that even without protection, not a speck of blood, dirt, or tissue ever touches me. That's why I'm the one who gets all the calls for these jobs. I've handled some truly gruesome cleanups, from mass murders to suicides, and I've done it all while being totally naked, yet somehow, not a trace of blood is left behind. On top of my work, though, I'm also dealing with some personal issues. My younger brother, he's used to being in front of a camera all the time. The problem is, when he finds himself in a room without any CCTV or cameras recording him, he completely loses it. He can't stand the thought of not being watched. If he's not being filmed, It feels to him like his every move is pointless, like he's not even truly existing. So, one day, while I was in the middle of a crime scene clean, completely naked, my younger brother called me. He was having a full-blown meltdown because he was freaking out over the fact that no one was recording him. "My entire existence is being wasted!" he screamed, and for just a second, I lost focus. In that brief moment, a drop of blood landed on me. Luckily, it didn't affect my reputation. I've been cleaning crime scenes while naked for 2 decades, and people understand that I'm not perfect. I'm human, after all. But things started to change when new competition entered the scene. A guy came in who had a bizarre trick up his sleeve. He could find severed arms, attach them to his body, and make them work. The guy was able to clean up much faster than I could because, with multiple arms, he could cover more ground. Even though he was quicker, I was still more precise. I never got a single drop of blood or dirt on myself while cleaning, not even when I was doing it in the nude. One day, though, while I was in the middle of a cleanup, I saw him show up with 2 freshly attached arms. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw them. I knew exactly where those arms had come from. They belonged to my younger brother, the one who couldn't handle being in a room without cameras recording him. My brother had found himself in a place with no cameras, and he completely lost it. In his desperation, he took his own life. And that guy, the new competitor, was called in to clean up the aftermath. But instead of just doing his job, he had gone a step further. He'd taken my brother's arms and sewn them onto his own body. That's when I knew the competition was real, and it wasn't going anywhere. My dad's in hospice care right now. The doctors say he probably has between 2 to 6 weeks left. He's at home with nurses coming by regularly. I flew in last weekend since I live quite a distance away. When my mom and I first moved into this house, we were watching a movie together one night when we heard the side door open, followed by footsteps leading down to the basement, which is where my brother's room is. We thought it was him, so we called out his name, but there was no answer. We went down to the basement to check, and there was no one there. Later, my brother told us he had been at work all day. Since then, we've been hearing weird noises in the house, but I had moved out by then. Now that I'm back, these strange things have been happening again, and they're getting more frequent with each passing day. It seems to be limited to the main floor and basement, nothing upstairs. Here are some of the things that have happened. The living room light keeps flickering on and off by itself, no matter what. One night the power kept going out and coming back on, 5 times in total, yet there were no power outages reported anywhere online. I sleep on the main floor now. Lately, I keep hearing this strange banging sound, almost like someone's tapping the ceiling with a broom. It happens about 2 to 3 times a minute, but I can never figure out where it's coming from. Every time I open my door to listen closer, it stops. My mom doesn't hear it at all. My dad's been sleeping in my old room on the main floor because it's too difficult for him to make it up the stairs now. He told us he heard loud knocking on his door twice during the night. When he managed to get up to check, which is tough for him, there was no one there. Just today, I put a bottle of wine in the fridge, with the label facing sideways. After I closed the door, I watched the bottle spin on its own until the label was facing forward. They have a dog, and his ball was lying by the TV. It's winter, so all the windows were closed. We were watching a movie, and no one was moving. Out of nowhere, the ball rolled across the floor and stopped right by the couch where my mom and I were sitting. A few times now, we've lit white candles, and when we go to blow them out, we find a dead fly inside the melted wax. It's winter, so we haven't seen any flies around lately. I don't know what's happening here, or if it's all just in our heads, but I've been here for 6 days now, and something strange happens every single day. The last couple of days, it's been happening 2 to 3 times a day. Should I try to sage the house? Could this be related to my dad's illness? Is there anything else I should do about it? This all took place back in 2020. My dad's aunt had been battling breast cancer, and she was incredibly close to my mom and her only daughter. 2 nights after her passing, her daughter had a vivid dream where she saw her mom, still wearing a hospital gown, knocking on the door and begging to be let in. She got out of bed, repeating something like, "Mom is outside, I need to bring her in." Her husband and everyone else in the house tried to wake her up, but she continued toward the door. Just as she reached for the doorknob, she snapped back to reality and stepped away. This was the first time she had ever sleepwalked or talked in her sleep. I didn't hear about any of this until later because my mom decided to keep it from me, knowing I'm sensitive to things like this. The following day, we had a ritual, which is customary in our culture to honor the dead. My mom and brother returned home around 9 p.m. My room is right next to the porch, and theirs is adjacent to mine. I left my door open as a shortcut so they could come in, but they went to the back of the house to clean up. I stayed in my room, kept the door open for them, then hurried to open the back door for them. Afterward, I closed my room door and went to bed. Now I sleep with a mosquito net. This detail will make sense in a minute. As I was half asleep, I could feel someone near my bed. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow moving in the light from the porch, entering my room through the glass windows. It was almost as if it was asking me to come with it, but I was too exhausted from studying all day for my finals to move. I tried to ignore it, but then it grabbed my arm firmly and pulled me upright. That's when I fully woke up. My heart was racing, and the exact spot where it had grabbed me still hurt from the rough fabric of the mosquito net. It hadn't slipped its hand underneath. It had held me through the net, pulling me up. Shaking and terrified, I ran straight to my parents' bedroom and slept there for the night. Nothing else happened after that. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened during my finals that year, though. There were other unsettling incidents, but this one was by far the most terrifying. The night before my history exam, I had a vivid experience where I saw my late grandfather. He was really good at history, and in the dream, he reassured me that I would do well on my exam. The next day, I scored 96 out of 100, so maybe he was right. Another incident happened one morning while I was studying math. I accidentally knocked over my medicine bottle, and it rolled under the bed. I was too lazy to pick it up, so I left it there. Later, my mom called me for breakfast, and when I returned to my room, I found the bottle standing upside down next to my books, completely upright. To this day, I still don't have an explanation for any of these things. But I'm glad you took the time to read about it. Warning: contains triggering subjects. In a quiet, somewhat overlooked part of the bustling city, a man named Daniel lived a solitary, routine-driven life. His days unfolded in the soft clacking of his keyboard as he worked through endless lines of code in the dimly lit office. Occasionally, the sounds of laughter from his colleagues would drift down the hallway, but Daniel remained in his own world, deeply focused on the intricate puzzle of programming. He was a man of precision, introverted and content in the company of his computer, where the logic of ones and zeros provided a kind of peace. His hair, always a little disheveled from hours of intense focus, and the faint spark of curiosity in his eyes painted the picture of a man who thrived in structure. His life, much like the code he wrote, was orderly and predictable. At home, however, it was a different story. The atmosphere was filled with a warm, yet chaotic energy. Ethan, his young son, bounced through the rooms, a constant blur of excitement and wonder at the world around him. Ethan was autistic, and his mother, Linda, was his anchor in a sea of overwhelming sensory experiences and social interactions. Linda had a deep, unspoken understanding of their son, a bond with him that Daniel could never quite seem to grasp. It was as if she had her own way of speaking to Ethan, a silent, unbreakable language that Daniel admired but couldn't fully comprehend. Linda's patience and strength were a source of admiration for Daniel, though he often felt like an outsider in his own family, unsure of his place in Ethan's life. Ethan's fascination with technology began at a very young age. His face would light up at the sight of a computer screen, a simple yet captivating piece of the world that he could understand. As he grew older, his interest in the digital world only deepened, and he quickly became skilled in areas that amazed Daniel, especially when it came to hacking. Linda was cautious, uneasy about where this talent might lead, but Daniel saw it as something special, a unique way for him to bond with his son. Together, they would spend hours navigating coding challenges and digital puzzles. It was during those quiet moments that Daniel felt closest to Ethan, and those memories, though fleeting, were ones that he treasured deeply. But the world Ethan had so eagerly embraced, the digital realm that once held such fascination for him, had a far darker side, one that Daniel had never dared to explore. The deep web was a place of anonymity and danger, a murky underworld where the darkest corners of humanity hid behind screens. Despite Linda's concerns and warnings, Ethan's curiosity grew with each passing day, and before long, he found himself venturing deeper into the shadows of the internet. Daniel tried to keep track of his son's increasingly risky explorations, but the temptation of the forbidden proved too powerful for Ethan to resist. One day, Ethan stumbled across something he could never forget, a live stream showing a young girl being held captive. His innocent, wide eyes filled with horror as the images on the screen took root in his mind. Terrified, he turned to his father, desperate for answers. Daniel's heart raced as he realized the depth of what Ethan had uncovered. His son had seen the monsters lurking in the digital abyss, and Daniel knew it was his responsibility to shield Ethan from the nightmare that had been exposed to them both. In the days that followed, the bond between father and son seemed to strengthen as they tried to navigate the dangerous digital world together. But despite his best efforts, Daniel could not protect Ethan from the ever-present darkness creeping in. The boundaries between their reality and the dark web began to blur, and soon they found themselves ensnared in a dangerous web of deceit and depravity, an entanglement neither of them fully understood. Ethan's fascination with the live stream transformed into an all-consuming obsession, and he poured every waking hour into uncovering more about the girl's captivity. Daniel watched helplessly as his son, once so full of promise, became consumed by the very thing that had once brought them together. Then came the day that changed everything, a day that seemed like any other. Ethan was in his room, the glow of his computer screen casting an eerie light across his face. Meanwhile, Daniel stood in the kitchen, his heart weighed down by an unshakable sense of dread that had been building for weeks. The knock on the door caught him by surprise, and the two men who introduced themselves as representatives of the Internet service provider raised suspicion from the start. They said they needed to check the router, but the cold, empty look in their eyes told Daniel everything he needed to know. The nightmare unfolded with horrifying speed. Ethan was yanked from his room, his terrified screams echoing through the house. Linda's cries of anguish pierced the air, but Daniel was powerless to stop what was happening. The men's strength and cruelty overpowered him, and despite his desperate attempts to fight back, they took Ethan from him. The house, once filled with the noise of everyday life, was left in chaos. The smell of fear and panic hung heavy in the air. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the silence settled, leaving Daniel and Linda in a suffocating void of grief and despair. Days turned into weeks, but Ethan's absence only deepened the emptiness. Hope of finding him faded with each passing moment. The police seemed to have little to offer, and the dark web remained an uncrackable fortress. Desperate to numb the pain, Daniel turned to alcohol, seeking solace in the bottle as he tried to escape the unbearable guilt and loss. Meanwhile, Linda's mental health deteriorated, her mind unraveling under the weight of her own guilt and heartache. One night, a message appeared on Daniel's screen from an anonymous account, nothing more than a link accompanied by the chilling words, "You're next." His hands shook uncontrollably as he clicked the link, and his heart dropped when the live stream began. There, on the screen, was Ethan's terrified face. The room was dark and damp, the heavy air thick with the unmistakable scent of fear. His son, the boy he had tried so desperately to protect, was now in the grip of the very monsters he had been fighting to expose. And now, it seemed, they were coming for him. The screams that echoed through the house that night weren't just coming from the speakers. They were a horrific symphony of anguish, loss, and terror, a painful reminder of everything they had lost. In that moment, Daniel knew with painful certainty that Ethan was gone, and with him, any hope of redemption. The reality of it hit him harder with every passing minute. By morning, the raw emptiness inside him had become unbearable, a wound too deep to heal, no matter how much he drank to try to forget. Linda's condition deteriorated by the day, her mind slowly shattering under the weight of the horrors they had both witnessed. The vibrant woman who had once been the steady anchor in Ethan's life now seemed to be a hollow shell, lost in a world of her own torment. Daniel wanted to help, but his own guilt was an insurmountable barrier, clouding his thoughts and actions. He felt like a failure, not only to Ethan but also to Linda and himself. The world around them seemed to grow colder and darker with each passing day. Their once safe home had become a suffocating cage, filled only with painful memories they couldn't escape. In Daniel's mind, the live stream replayed on an endless loop. Ethan's terrified eyes, filled with pleading and despair, haunted him. He knew he couldn't let this stand. He had to do something. His grief transformed into a fierce, unrelenting anger. Determined to make things right, he turned to the dark web, the very place that had taken his son from him. With vengeance in his heart, he vowed to navigate its twisted depths, to find the ones who had done this, and bring them to justice. The days slipped by, and Daniel's obsession with finding the truth grew stronger. The orderly life he had once led now crumbled beneath him as he descended further into the chaos of the digital underworld. He uncovered a network of predators, each more disturbing than the last. With every revelation, the realization of just how powerless he was hit him harder. Yet he couldn't stop. He couldn't give up until he uncovered the truth, until he found the monsters who had destroyed his world. His nights blurred into drunken rages, while his days were consumed by a painful fog of tears and helplessness. One evening the phone rang, a sound that had become as scarce as hope in the emptiness of their lives. It was the hospital, delivering news that Linda had suffered a psychotic break and needed to be hospitalized immediately. For Daniel, the call was like the final snap of the fragile thread that had been holding his sanity together. He had failed to save Ethan, and now, he felt powerless to save her too. With a heart heavy with grief, he agreed to her institutionalization, feeling as though he was losing her to the darkness as well. Now, alone in a house that used to be full of life and laughter, Daniel was confronted with the harsh reality of his existence. Ethan was gone, and no matter what he did, that void would never be filled. All that remained was a single, consuming mission: to track down the monsters who had stolen his son and make them pay for the devastation they had caused. The bottle of whiskey sitting on the table whispered promises of numbness, of forgetting the pain, but Daniel knew all too well that drinking wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he took a slow, steady breath, his eyes locking onto the flickering glow of his computer screen. A new purpose had taken hold of him: to become the very thing that hunted those monsters. And he wouldn't stop until they were all brought to justice. The house felt hauntingly silent now, save for the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the keyboard and the occasional hum of the ceiling fan above. Daniel's transformation was underway, and soon the digital world would feel the weight of his wrath. The whiskey sat untouched, a reminder of the man he used to be, a man who could no longer afford the luxury of drowning in his sorrow. He had a new identity now, and it was shaped by the shadows of vengeance. As he descended deeper into the dark web, he became a ghost, a figure of retribution, relentlessly hunting down those who preyed on the innocent. Ethan's memory was his compass, guiding him through the darkness, keeping him from losing himself in the abyss. The following months blurred into one long, relentless mission of hacking and vigilantism. Daniel's skills grew more precise and effective with each passing day, his need for revenge propelling him forward. He infiltrated hidden forums, exposed the predators who lurked in the dark corners of the web, and brought their crimes to the attention of the authorities, one after another. Despite his relentless pursuit, the people who had taken Ethan remained elusive, a ghost taunting him from the farthest reaches of the internet. Then, one day, a message appeared in his encrypted chat. It was from someone claiming to be responsible for his son's disappearance. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he read the malicious words, daring him to find them, to join their sickening game. It was a challenge he couldn't back down from. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse, pulling Daniel through a maze of encrypted servers and fake personas. His obsession with finding Ethan and the ones who took him began to consume everything: his health, his sanity, and whatever fragments of his humanity still remained. The boundary between justice and obsession blurred with each keystroke, until eventually, there was no difference. The final showdown took place in a grimy, forsaken apartment on the city's outskirts. The air reeked of decay as Daniel stepped over the threshold, the sound of his footsteps the only noise in the eerily quiet space. He had tracked their digital trail to this decaying hideout, his fury pushing him forward like a relentless tide. The walls of the room were covered with screens, each displaying some horrifying scene, like a grotesque gallery showcasing the destruction of innocence. His heart hammered in his chest as he searched the room, but when he stepped inside, there was nothing. The sour stench of decay still hung in the air, tinged with the sharp bite of bleach. Then it hit him, a crushing realization that sent a cold shiver down his spine. They had been watching him the entire time, manipulating him like a puppet in their sick game. His gaze fell to a USB stick on the floor, and a bitter, mocking grin formed in his mind. It was their parting shot, their way of taunting him one last time. The message was clear: they were untouchable, hidden safely in their digital fortress, and they had won. The walls seemed to close in around him, the crushing weight of his failure pressing down with an unbearable force. Crushed by the weight of his failures, Daniel trudged home, the cold night air offering no relief from the storm inside him. The whiskey bottle beckoned from the kitchen counter, its call a tempting escape from the endless pain. He knew he had nothing left. The love of his life was gone, and the people who had taken his son were still free, untouched by justice. The thought of facing another day in a world that had robbed him of everything was unbearable. With hands shaking, he grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. The words spilled out, a raw apology to Linda, an admission of his failures as both a husband and a father. He poured his heart into the letter, speaking of his love for Ethan, the happiness his son had brought them, and the overwhelming regret that now filled the space where those moments of joy once existed. The letter was painful to write, a confession of his inadequacies and the guilt that had consumed him. The whiskey whispered to him, promising to dull the pain, to bring an end to the ache in his heart. He took a long, final drink, feeling the burn of the alcohol slide down his throat. The bottle slipped from his grip, clinking against the floor, a sound that echoed in the hollow emptiness of the house. His eyes then drifted to the knife on the counter, a silent observer of his torment. With a deep, shuddering breath, Daniel wrote one last letter to Linda. This letter was drenched in sorrow, a confession of his inability to save Ethan and be the man she needed. Every word felt like a burden, each stroke of the pen another reminder of his failure. When he finished, his hand trembled as he set the paper down, the weight of his grief nearly too much to bear. The whiskey bottle, which once symbolized an escape, now felt like a hollow symbol of the emptiness that consumed him. He took another swig, the warmth spreading through his veins a fleeting illusion of comfort. The room seemed to spin as he placed the bottle down, its clink against the floorboards ringing out like a final, sorrowful goodbye. His trembling hands reached for the knife. The cold steel bit into his skin, a stark contrast to the feverish heat of his overwhelming grief. He had failed them both, failed Linda, failed Ethan. In his drunken stupor, their faces appeared before him, their eyes filled with judgment, staring back at him from the blood-stained walls of his mind. He knew, in that moment, it was time to pay the ultimate price for all his shortcomings. He sliced through the flesh of his left wrist, the pain a fleeting distraction from the overwhelming weight of his guilt. Blood flowed from the wound, a crimson river that mirrored the regret he had poured into the pages of his letter. He watched the blood spread across his skin, a strange sense of release filling him as the warmth of his lifeblood mingled with the cold, unforgiving tiles beneath him. With a shaky breath, he made the same cut on his right wrist. The room spun around him, the combination of alcohol and blood loss clouding his thoughts. The world around him grew dim, the edges of his vision blurring like an old photograph left out in the rain. He slumped to the floor, the knife slipping from his grasp and clattering against the tiles, its sound echoing through the silence. The whiskey bottle, his silent companion, remained at his side, its presence a reminder of everything that had led him here. His thoughts grew fuzzy, the anguish of his grief slowly fading into a numbing coldness that spread through his body. The house was still, a tomb of unspoken sorrow, as Daniel's life drained away. His breaths grew shallower, and the world around him slowly slipped into darkness. That darkness, though, was comforting, a stark contrast to the horrors that had consumed him for so long. In his final moments, he saw Ethan's face, the pure light of innocence that had once brightened his world. Upstairs, Linda's cries for Daniel went unanswered. Her fractured mind couldn't grasp the silence that had overtaken their home. She had lost their son, and now her husband, too, was slipping away. Her sobs grew louder as she stumbled through the house, her steps heavy with despair. Trembling, she reached for the kitchen door, pushing it open, only to be met with a horrific scene. Daniel lay on the floor, his lifeblood pooling into the cold tiles, the knife discarded beside him. In his hand, crumpled and stained with blood, was the letter he had written, a testament to his love and regret. When Linda saw the words, it tore through her heart like a jagged blade. She screamed, a sound that seemed to fracture the very air around her, the agony of her loss so immense it shook the walls of the house. The whiskey bottle, once a symbol of their shared struggles, now stood ominously in the corner, a cruel reminder of their destruction. Her eyes fell upon her son's photo on the fridge. the image of Ethan's bright smile a jagged shard to her soul. The room spun around her, a swirl of painful memories. She dropped to her knees beside Daniel, his skin cold and clammy beneath her trembling hands. She tried to press down on the wound, her tears mixing with the pool of blood that had already stained the floor. But it was too late. Daniel was gone. The abyss of grief now engulfed her alone. The days that followed were a blur, filled with funerals, condolences, and empty gestures. Their home, once warm with life, was now a hollow shell, a stark reminder of everything they had lost. Linda's sanity began to unravel, the seams of her reality stretching, fraying beyond repair. The whispers of guilt, regret, and despair echoed louder than the voices of well-meaning friends and family. The darkness that had consumed Daniel now sought to claim her, too. Nights were the hardest. Her dreams became a battlefield, haunted by the image of the live stream that had taken her son's life. She would wake up, heart racing, only to find the house as empty as her soul. Her mind, a fractured puzzle, was filled with triggers, every moment a potential explosion of agony. The whispers, now constant, urged her to join Daniel, to find solace in the oblivion he had sought. Once, the house had been a sanctuary of love and safety. Now, it had become a prison. The walls seemed to murmur of her failures, each shadow hiding the monsters that had stolen her son. The silence felt like a scream, the absence of laughter amplifying the grief. Linda's thoughts splintered, her mind unable to bear the crushing weight of her sorrow. She was adrift in a vast, empty sea of madness, no anchor to hold her steady. Her descent into despair was swift. Each passing day saw her grip on reality slipping further. The whispers, dark and insistent, grew louder, more frantic. One fateful night, when the moonlight cast a cold, haunting glow through the windows, Linda could no longer endure the pain. She picked up the knife, her fingers trembling with the memory of Daniel's final moments, the echoes of his despair reverberating in her mind. But as she held the blade to her wrist, something stopped her. In the reflection of the steel, she saw Ethan's eyes, wide and pleading. It wasn't a vision, a hallucination, but a silent plea from the very depths of her heart. His eyes, full of innocence and love, seemed to say, "Survive for me. Don't let the darkness take you too." With a strength she didn't know she had, Linda placed the knife back down on the counter, her fingers shaking as they relinquished their hold on the cold steel. The darkness that had threatened to consume her slowly crept back. But now, she chose to fall into it willingly, not as a victim, but as a survivor. In the depths of her despair, a single promise formed: "I will live for both of us, Ethan. I will not let your death be in vain." The whispers that had once called to her began to fade, their grip loosening. The house, once a prison, no longer held the same sway over her. She embraced the only thing left to her, hope. Though it flickered faintly, it was there. And with it came a fire, burning hotter and fiercer than she had ever known. The whispers of the dark web still haunted her, drifting through her dreams like twisted specters, taunting her with images of the faces that had taken her son. But Linda wasn't the same woman who had mourned in silence. She had been remade by loss, her heart steeled by grief and the sharp edges of rage. With Daniel's final letter crumpled tightly in her hand, she moved toward the computer. Her fingers trembled as they hovered above the keyboard, but she no longer hesitated. She had watched her husband's descent into obsession, understood the depths of the digital abyss he had plunged into, but she was determined to make it her own. This was not just about vengeance. It was about justice, about turning the tragedy into something that could be used to help others, to expose the darkness that had taken her son. The screen flickered, its eerie glow illuminating her face, casting shadows that seemed to draw her deeper into the web. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, her every move watched by unseen eyes. But she had no more fear, nothing left to lose. Her heart beat with fierce determination, and with a deep, steadying breath, Linda pressed the first key. She stepped into the digital abyss. There was no turning back now. The once passive, grieving woman had vanished. In her place stood a mother, transformed, driven by vengeance, by love, and by the need for justice. Her son's memory was her shield, his name her weapon. The house that had once been silent with despair now thrummed with purpose, alive with the energy of a new mission. The computer screen hummed like a heartbeat as Linda pieced together fragments of the vast digital landscape. Each click, each keystroke was a small victory, bringing her closer to the monsters that had stolen her son. The quiet hum of the machine was now her ally, guiding her through the labyrinth of the dark web, where the true predators hid. Linda had become something new, a digital vigilante, a silent guardian on a quest for justice in a world where shadows reigned. She was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter. And with every moment she drew closer to the truth, her resolve hardening as she navigated the endless digital sea. Her son's memory was her compass, guiding her through the darkness. Never in my life did I imagine having such a job as this. Yet here I was. I found a job listing for a company called Bell, Home Security and Surveillance. With paid training. Bills were stacking up and I wasn't getting any replies, so I filled out an application. Received an email almost instantly telling me I got the job. No interview? I thought. A document contract was attached to the email. A DMCA? The email read that I got the job, and to keep it, I had to sign the contract and essentially promise not to speak or share details of my training and position. I was in no position to argue or complain, so I signed. Didn't even read the entire contract, which I know I should have. Come October 1st, it was time for my big first day. I was asked to arrive around 9 p.m. Seemed like I would have the graveyard shift. I put the address on my GPS, but nothing came up. I searched it up and nothing. As I was about to email the company, my GPS automatically refreshed and started giving directions. I was puzzled but paid it no mind. Didn't want to be late on my first day. I started the engine and drove off. The office building lied far from the city in the outskirts. Deep, and I mean deep into the vast woods. A road veered off from the highway which I had to take to get there. I drove across this bridge over a small river and finally arrived at my destination. The building had a weird shape to it, unlike anything I seen. Instead of your usual boxy structure, the building was tilted as if about to fall over. No windows or doors were visible. Just white walls without a single speck of dirt or dust. I left my car at the parking lot before the building and got out. I approached the wall, which suddenly slid open. A man in a black tuxedo greeted me. "Mr. James Morgan. Welcome to Bell. We're happy to have you. I'm happy to be here." I shook his hand and followed him inside. We walked down various empty halls with no rooms in sight. I remember looking up to see the walls reach for the sky with no ceiling in sight. The man stopped at a corner and pressed his hand against the wall, which slid open like the entrance. Inside was a small office complete with a desk, computer, and 3 chairs. Cabinets and drawers were stacked with papers. "Please, Mr. Morgan, take a seat." I took the closest seat as he took the one behind the desk. "Mr. Morgan, here at Bell, Home Security and Surveillance, we take our job graciously in ensuring safety to our customers from all dangers." I just nodded as he went along. Dangers come in many forms. Theft, break-in, But we specifically specialize in a very specific kind of danger. What kind of danger? Tell me, Mr. Morgan. Do you believe in ghosts? Lost for words, I wasn't sure how to respond. I mean, how do you respond to such a question in such an out-of-place scenario? I'm an open-minded person. I see what I believe. Do you know why the company's name and logo is a bell? No. It's named after the Bell family, a religious family that lived in a church, with a notable bell tower. He retrieved an old photo from the cabinet behind him and placed it on the desk. They were known for ringing the bell every time danger appeared, to alert the town not from any invading armies but from witches. Taken aback from his words, I glanced down at the photo to find an old family from the 1800s holding pitchforks and torches. That's where it began, and we have continued their legacy ever since. Wait. You're a home security company that warns people about ghosts? We wait for a sign of paranormal activity. Thoroughly investigate it from here, using the cameras and sensors. If needed, we also use our hidden drones to properly scout the place. He returned the photo to the cabinet and continued. If a creature or otherworldly entity poses a threat, we immediately send a list of instructions to our client that share just enough details to know what type of entity is in their house and what to do. He leaned back on his chair and held his hands together. As our friends back here guide the client to safety, a team is dispatched to that location to deal with the entity. They then have 3 options: capture the entity, neutralize it, or eliminate it. So you're ghost hunters. We're no different than any other home security organization. We just take it a little further. Unreal, I thought. A dream. If not, then what? Okay. So what am I gonna do exactly? You'll be part of the team that deals with the entities directly. That's where the paid training comes into play. He stands up and waves me towards the door. After you. We left his office and headed further into the hallways, eventually coming across a locker room near a giant garage. A guy in a black uniform stepped out. James Morgan, I take it? I shaked his hand. Pleasure to meet you. The name's Michael. Michael Waters. And the pleasure is all mine. A little bell was pinned to his shirt along with a name tag. Let's get you into one of these, shall we? I nodded my head and turned to find the previous man now gone. Didn't recall hearing his footsteps either. In the locker room, I was handed a black t-shirt and pants, a belt with a few pouches for storing stuff, and a little bell and name tag. Nervous? Michael asked. Are we really ghost hunters, or was that man just messing with me? What man? The man. The guy in the tuxedo that walked me over here. He was standing right next to me. Oh, I see. Don't worry. Nobody could see the woman that hired me either. Michael began loading equipment onto a black van with a satellite on top, a giant yellow bell on its side. Really pushes the little theory me and my folks got going on. And what's that? The company is run by ghosts. Good ghosts hunting bad ghosts? Or something else, and probably much worse. Yeah, we help people. But I think it's all theatrics. What do you mean by that? Ghosts or not, you need money to get your resources. So they pose as a home security company. Help people on the side who then talk about the great, wonderful customer service we provide. Refer their friends and families. Pretend to be the good guys so people pay them to do what they only care about. Yes. Not every time, though. Some of my folks were told to purposefully leave customers in danger and fend for themselves. Can't sell home security if all homes are safe, you know. It was a lot to take in. I was ready to just leave and pretend this was just a bad dream, but I guess Michael took notice. I wouldn't leave. It's too late now. Too late? I don't know what happens when you leave. I do know that everyone that quits or walks out is never seen from again. I froze in place. Did Michael just threaten me? Had a good friend. He applied for this job despite my disagreement. You see, they find us losers who are stuck in debt. People that can't find a job. Promise us a huge paycheck. They do pay us. He placed the container into the van and shut the doors. But when my friend decided he had enough, he walked out and couldn't find him anywhere. Never went home. Nobody's seen him. Michael takes the keys from the wall and heads towards the front of the van. I reluctantly stepped into the passenger seat as he took the driver's. We're in this together now, James. I got your back if you got mine's. I sighed, accepting my fate. Michael started the van and we drove off. We were driving along the highway when a female voice came over the radio. Agents Waters and Morgan. Possible Level 4 entity detected. Level 4 entity? An entity that can be dealt with or handled. What about the other levels? A Level 5 entity can be left alone. A Level 4 entity can only be left alone under surveillance. Level 3 is an entity that must be dealt with right away. Level 2 is an entity that has a very specific way of dealing with. Level 1 is an entity that is out of our control. What levels are more frequent? Level 4 is the most common. I haven't been called to deal with any entities above them. We finally arrived at the address the female voice sent us and parked the van up front. Michael got out of the car and walked up to the house. I followed behind. He handed me an earpiece as he placed another in his ear. It's so Sharon can communicate with us. Sharon? The lady in the radio. Oh. Michael was about to knock on the door when we heard Sharon again. The client has vacated the premises. Proceed to enter. He carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside. I walked in after him and looked around the dark living room. I was ready to try the switch, but Michael stopped me. Even something as simple as the light turning on could upset or trigger these things. Best to leave it alone for now. He pulled out a tablet from the bag he was carrying and switched it on. It glowed a blue hue, bright enough to see the screen and nothing else. What are you doing? Just getting ready to gather some information. I glanced around and waited to see any sort of sign that a ghost was present. Nothing. Sharon, can you tell us what you got? Affirmative. Level 4 entity detected at 22:41 hours. Subject has the appearance of a female, 11 years in age. Subject is currently upstairs on the first bedroom to the right. Well do. I followed Michael upstairs to the mentioned room. When we entered, we did indeed find the girl Sharon talked about. Up to this point, I was just playing along with everyone else. Was still having trouble believing everything I'd been told. But any and all doubts went away as I laid my eyes on the girl. She was normal in terms of looks. She just so happened to be standing on the goddamn ceiling. Michael. Sharon, we found the entity. He proceeded to approach the girl. Hey, sweetie. Why don't you go ahead and come down to us? I stayed by the door and watched as Michael pulled out a piece of candy from his pouch. I got candy. You like candy? As he unwrapped and offered it to her, the girl started to slowly descend. My eyes widened and heart raced as red bloody hands ripped through the girl's feet as the body lowered itself. The right hand inside the girl's left foot let go of the ceiling and reached for the candy. I can't even, nor do I want to describe where the head of the thing came out from. All I'll say is it came out from between her legs. The thing snatched the candy out of Michael's grasp and shoved it in its mouth. Other parts of its body soon began to emerge out of the skin, like a person with no flesh who put on their clothes backwards, wearing the shirt as pants, and the pants as a shirt. All you could make out from what parts were visible was that the thing had no skin and probably why it used the girl's corpse as clothing. Michael seemed so unfazed, yet I was starting to panic. I lost my cool and darted downstairs and towards the exit. "James! No!" I heard a piercing cry behind me, accompanied by a loud crash. I turned around to find the thing chasing after me. The skin of the girl it was wearing started peeling away. I screamed and reached for the door when Michael opened fire on the thing. It stumbled into the wall and onto the floor. The thing was still breathing but severely wounded. "Sharon, we require medical attention." I checked for any injuries on myself and looked at Michael. "I'm fine. It's not for you or me." He pressed 2 fingers against the thing's neck. "You want to save that thing? It tried to kill me. It's the job. Capture these things and keep them out of trouble." "You're insane. You've filled out the application and put on the uniform. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not. I'm leaving. I told you what happens if you leave." "Coincidence. That's all." "Okay. If you're so sure. Go ahead. Walk away. I hate this job. I think the reason I get away talking about it is because no one would in their right mind believe such a ridiculous story. Still work there, of course. The pay is beyond great. I got my own house now. Car of my dreams. Thought if I lived a good life doing what I always wanted to do, it would take my mind away from the horrors I have to live through working there. But every morning, after saying goodbye to Michael and heading home, I dread the day that we both encounter something beyond our control. The day we don't clock out. I write this now to anyone who may dare read and take my story to heart. While I still can tell that story, because tonight I go back to work. Michael called me in the late afternoon telling me to have a nice meal and do an activity I love. "We survived this long, Michael. We can push through another night. It's a level 2.